Carve a few Chinese lattice windows to frame the harmony between heaven and humankind.
Build a long corridor of the East to reach the innermost depths of history and culture.
It is a meandering melody of Suzhou music, sung with grace and elegance.
It is some simple sketches of mountains and forests, not wanting in detail and delicacy.
Pick 1,000 pieces of lakeside rock in all shapes and contours.
Take a share of the Suzhou waters with all the mist and haze.
Paint a dozen scrolls of floral light and watery shadow.
Write a few chapters about the fading years and distant times. On December 4th, 1997, 4 of Suzhou's classical gardens were entered by UNESCO on its list of World Cultural Heritages. To the common people of Suzhou, the attention that a world organization bestows upon their city is just like one of those regular spring rains. There is nothing extraordinary about it. After all, they are the ones who know best the worth of these gardens. One might say that they actually live in gardens, because Suzhou is a city of gardens. If classical gardens are not cultural heritages, what is a cultural heritage?
One need only take a look at the street signs to tell whether Suzhou is indeed a garden city. Scattered in different parts of Suzhou are the 4 gardens on the World Cultural Heritages list: the Humble Administrator's Garden, the Lingering Garden, the Master of Fishing Nets Garden, and the Mountain Villa of Circular Grace. We will not go into the emotional attachments that the natives of Suzhou feel for their gardens, because it is difficult to explain in a few words how the gardens have become part of Suzhou people's love for their homeland. Visitors to Suzhou all consider the gardens a must-see. They want to see for themselves whether, as they've been told, the Humble Administrator's Garden is really so spacious, whether the Lingering Garden is really so exquisite, whether the Master of Fishing Nets Garden is really so refined, and whether the rockery in the Mountain Villa of Circular Grace is really so superbly crafted. True, the admission fees have gone up, but the gardens cannot be skipped, or else the whole trip to Suzhou would be meaningless. In the eyes of many, Suzhou would not be Suzhou if it did not have its gardens.
Gardens are also known as city mountains and forests. A very interesting phrase. The city is the epitome of prosperity, but it is too often associated with hustle and bustle. On the other hand, mountains and forests stand for a natural environment, a pristine serenity and reclusiveness in the universe. The Suzhou Garden is a typical case of finding this serenity in the midst of hustle and bustle. Outside the garden walls, the streets are filled with the flow of traffic. But within the white walls and under the black tiled eaves, leisure manifests itself, with the fish swimming under the lotus leaves, and tranquility is found in the shade of the banana trees.
Actually, to the modern person, the Suzhou Garden is not only a place where one can find tranquility in the midst of urban noise, but also a place where one can reach back to yesterday from today. Just wander alongside this stretch of green water, and you will find yourself unwittingly in the Song Dynasty. Cross the threshold of this forbidding stone gateway, and you will have stepped into the Ming Dynasty.
There are roughly 3 types of classical gardens in Suzhou: royal gardens, monastic gardens, and private gardens. Most of the existing gardens here are private gardens. The Gusu Terrace, built by He Lu, and the Guanhua Palace, built by Fu Cha, both kings of Wu during the spring and autumn period, are the oldest royal gardens in Suzhou. Buddhism thrived from the Qing through the Tang dynasties. As monasteries mushroomed, so did their gardens. The landscape of monastic gardens is painted in words in the lines of Du Mu's poem. Of the 480 monasteries of the southern dynasties, how many towers and terraces are standing in the mist and rain? Regrettably, with the passage of time, the flying eaves and uplifted roof corners of those gardens have long faded into the mist and haze of the Suzhou waters to become a distant dream.
When the brocade of history reached the Song Dynasty, especially when it reached the section called Suzhou, the craftsmanship came all the more exquisite. Not only the plants of Songche poetry and the idyllic life of Songshi poetry were woven into it, but the private gardens of Suzhou also became part of the fabric.
The garden culture of Suzhou reached its peak during the Ming Dynasty. According to the records of Suzhou Prefecture, there were as many as 271 gardens of all sizes in the Suzhou Prefecture. The famous Humble Administrator's Garden, Lingering Garden, Art Orchard, and Peace Mountain Villa were all built in this period.
By this time, a splendid aura appeared on the horizon of Suzhou's culture and art, namely the Suzhou-style painting, which developed simultaneously with popular arts of Kunshu, opera, and storytelling. The unique styles of the 4 great painters of Ming, Shanzhu, Wen Zhengming, Tang Ying, and Qiu Ying directly or indirectly found their way into the art of garden design. Historical records show that Wen Zhengming was personally involved in the design of the humble administrator's garden. To this day, Chinese wisteria planted by Wen himself still stands at the entrance. 400 years have passed. This woody plant, with its gnarled roots and knotted trunk, has seen much water go under the bridge. Now it spreads its vines like a canopy.
The Qing dynasty saw the building of gardens in Suzhou reach new heights and scales. The Garden of Happiness, the Twin Garden, the Mountain Villa of Circular Grace, the Meandering Garden, the Listening to the Maple Garden, the Crane Garden, the Carefree Garden, and so forth were all created in that period.
It is often said that the private gardens of Suzhou originated during the Song and Yuan dynasties and came into full blossom during the Ming and Qing dynasties. After all the enrichment and improvement of those 2 dynasties, the art of garden building became more sophisticated than ever. A highly developed art of garden building came into being, complete with rich content and exquisite artistry. That is how the Suzhou gardens became outstanding examples of classical Chinese garden art.
Maple Bridge, now a world-famous site, was just one of those ordinary bridges in the city of Suzhou. 1,200 years ago, the poet Zhang Ji happened to moor his boat here for the night. His 28-character poem became an immortal song of Suzhou, transcending both time and space.
Hentang, an ordinary Suzhou village town, has become a destination of many readers' imaginations. 800 years ago, the Che poem, to the tune of Qing Yuanan by the Song poet He Zhu, turned Hentang into a memorable site in the history of Chinese literature, colored with the special ambience of Songche poetry. This is how He Zhu blends traveler's melancholy with the scenic beauty of the water town. How does one measure this idle melancholy, may I ask? A river full of mist and wind, a city full of catkins in gentle breeze, plus the rain.
The city of Suzhou, reverberating with the melodies of ancient music, is the homeland of Tang poetry as well as Song lyrics. Indeed, many of the key figures of the lower Yangtze culture were born here, grew up here, and completed their life cycle amidst these soft waters and gentle hills.
Suzhou, or Stone Lake, was where the Song poet Fan Chengda lived for many years. After he retired, he built a garden here, planted many flowers and trees, and named it Stone Lake Villa. The villa has long since vanished, but a memorial hall has been built in its place in honor of the poet, flanked by steles of the 60 impromptu poems, 4 seasons of field and garden, engraved on them in the poet's own calligraphy. Now a local attraction.
If literary works may be called the rubbings of life, such rubbings have profound implications. They are like the streaks of white hair grown out of a head of black when a poet has suffered too long from homesickness. Just because the poets lived among the misty waters of Suzhou, they were able to row their boats of inspiration into the river of Chinese verse.
There was another Song poet named Su Shuqian. He did not leave us any rubbings, but a 3-dimensional poem in painting. That is the oldest living garden in Suzhou, the Chanlangting, or the Pavilion of Surging Waves. Chanlangting of today has lost its original looks, but the basic framework and structure remain the same. What is unique about this garden is that unlike other gardens, which have ponds dug and mounds piled up within a limited space, its landscape follows the contours of the natural terrain and incorporates the water that surrounds it. These are the famous lines sung by the fisherman in Shu Qi, the Fisherman. Its original intent was to renounce the mundane world and sing of one's true feelings. But in the course of time, the lone fisherman on the cold river and the idle old man with the bamboo hat on the solitary boat became synonymous with retired scholar officials living in hermitage in the mountains and forests.
Many scholars have suggested that Suzhou has a tradition of leisure culture. Let me explain. Suzhou has produced many top-notch scholars and literary talents, but not many of them made important political contributions. The Suzhou literati were not interested in civil service. They preferred instead to live in seclusion, not as hermits who retire deep into the mountains, but as hermits who live in the arts. They admired the reclusive lifestyle of men of letters of the 4th and 5th centuries, like Tao Yuanming, Ji Kang, and Yuan Ji. They turned their inner world into a reified spiritual oasis, building for themselves a material structure that encapsulated their aesthetic ideals, their moral values, and their cosmological concepts. Classical Chinese gardens began to take on theme names around the late Tang period. It is these names that make a difference because they stand for the principal themes of gardens. Take Changlang Pavilion, the Pavilion of Surging Waves, for example. The name comes from the song of Changlang in the tale of the fisherman, in Chu Ci, the songs of the south. The Song dynasty poet Su Xunqing, who spent his retired life there after being unjustly banished from the capital, used the name because Qu Yuan, the poet who authored the major works in the Chu Ci during his exile, met a fisherman who sang him the song of Changlang, advising him to go with the flow of the world.
The father of China's scholar hermits is the Qing dynasty poet Tao Yuanming. The environment he lived in is epitomized in these 2 lines. My cottage is built in the midst of the human world, yet there is no noise from the carriage or horse. The gardens of Suzhou, when they served as the original owners' residences, though not hemmed in by today's noisy bustle, were after all located in the midst of city streets and boulevards. Gardens like the Pavilion of Surging Waves are exceptional in that they are both hidden from and open to the outside world. Most of the gardens close themselves in with high walls. As the saying goes, first-rate hermits stay in the city, second-rate hermits stay in the country, third-rate hermits stay in the office.
From Tang and Song down to Ming and Qing, the rich and powerful aristocrat, as well as the successful and famous literati, transformed the ancient sages' quest for the true meaning of life into the practical enjoyment of life. In doing so, they succeeded in finding the happy combination of the geography, environment, and quality of life. In the final analysis, Classical Garden was the joint project of those who were retired, wealthy, and culture on the one hand, and those who were lowly, poor, but gifted with craftsmanship on the other. The vast land of the lower Yangtze Valley happens to be endowed with rich produce, lush vegetation, thriving culture, and superior artisanship. It has provided fertile soil for the cultivation of this magnificent flower of Chinese civilization.
The Suzhou Museum has held many exhibitions. One of these has left people with an especially strong impression because of its unique Suzhou characteristics, both in form and in content. That was the exhibition of calligraphy on fans by Qing Dynasty Zhuang Yuan.
Zhang Yuan was the title for the first-place winner of the highest level of imperial examinations. You can imagine the prestige the title carried. Consider the fact that 2/3 of the Qing dynasty Zhang Yuan are represented in the fan calligraphy collection in the Suzhou Museum.
Jiangsu province boasts a highly developed culture as the breeding ground for gifted scholars. Of the 112 Zhuangyuan of the Qing dynasty, 49 came from Jiangsu, and of these, about half, or 24, came from Suzhou. Small wonder that some people call Suzhou a city of Zhuangyuan.
This old house used to be the residence of Wang Tonghe from the city of Changshu. After winning the title of Zhangyuan, Wang served as teacher for 2 successive emperors, Tongzhi and Guangshu, enjoying the status of a prime minister. During the palace reform of 1898, he recommended Kang You-wei and other reformers to the emperor and played a significant role in the movement. Suzhou not only preserves cultural objects directly related to Zhangyuan, but has witnessed the success stories of 4 pairs of grandfather-grandson or uncle-nephew relatives, all winning the title of Zhangyuan. Wang Tonghe and his nephew Wang Zhengyuan and calligrapher Lu Renxiang and his great-grandfather Lu Kentang were 2 of those honored pairs. While the number of Zhangyuan in Suzhou is impressive, those who carried the title of Jinshi, winners of the highest level of the imperial examinations, were even more numerous.
During the imperial days, winning the title of Zhuangyuan was also known as winning the laurel of the Moon Palace. With academic success came official titles and political power, as well as opportunities to accumulate wealth. This may also be called financial opportunities in official Korea. These officials who were honest enjoyed quite decent remunerations. Those who were greedy knew how to grab for more. The former often won the praise of the public for staying morally upright and incorruptible. The latter were described by the saying, 3 years of service in a Qing prefecture result in 100,000 ounces of snow-white silver.
After all the trials and tribulations, the ups and downs of an official career, the physically and mentally fatigued Zhangyuan and Zhenshi title holders began to think about their homeward journey, about becoming the fisherman on the lake, about appreciating the light breeze and the bright moon. Life's journey is long and tortuous, but few can escape its simple circularity.
But circularity doesn't necessarily mean repetition. You go off on a boat full of poetry and classics. You return in a carriage loaded with silver. Light breeze and bright moon don't cost a penny. That is just a poetic license those well-fed garden owners used during one of their literary rendezvous. They also went out of their way to avoid mentioning the vulgar word money. However, history does not pass harsh judgments on these people because, after all, They were the ones who left to posterity the insurpassable legacy of scores of Suzhou classical gardens.
Zhouzhong, a water town in metropolitan Suzhou that has recently become famous, produced one of the richest merchants south of the Yangtze by the name of Shen Wangshan. It would not be an exaggeration to say that his wealth could compete with that of the nation, because when the Ming Emperor ordered the renovation of the city walls of Nanjing, 2/3 of the funding came from Mr. Shen. Perhaps because he was thought to be challenging the royal house in a show of wealth, he was finally banished to the borders. For a time, Shen reigned over a big part of the country as its #1 tycoon. But somehow, he never left behind even 1/10 of an acre of a classical garden. There may have been scholar merchants in the annals of Chinese history, but they were a far cry from the scholar officials. Between these two types, there was an obvious discrepancy.
To appreciate a classical garden, to see how it assimilates the most beautiful elements of nature into its landscape, requires very special knowledge. Of course, that knowledge also includes Chinese literature, especially poetry, Chinese painting, and Chinese philosophy. That's why I say it isn't a simple matter to be able to truly appreciate the Suzhou Gardens. It is a comprehensive art of the highest order. It is characteristic of a Suzhou garden to encompass a rich variety of content within a limited space. That is true of Chinese gardens in general, but especially of those in Suzhou. There was a rich family in my hometown of Guiyang. The head of the family was a high-ranking official in the Manchu courts. He built a garden in Guiyang. It wasn't bad, but he couldn't solve the problem of water supply. In Guiyang, you dig into the ground and get only stones. Here in Suzhou, you just dig 2 feet deep and you get water. That's what's so wonderful about Suzhou Gardens. I'm not saying nice things about Suzhou because I'm in Suzhou. It is an objective reality. It's not just the working people who make the Suzhou Gardens a reality. It also involves poets, painters, and master artisans. They are all indispensable.
It is worth noting that many of the owners of the classical gardens in Suzhou were neither rich merchants with fortunes worth a whole empire, nor impoverished scholars in dire straits. Most of them were elite gentry of ample means. These scholar officials spent their whole career writing eloquent essays and treatises, reports and memorials. Finally, after they retired into the privacy of their gardens, they began to write about their own spiritual yearnings and express their true feelings. Only then did they realize that they had a soul that they call their own. That is why even pundits like Ruan Dacheng started writing such romantic dramas such as Swallow's Notes and Spring Festival Lantern Riddles.
The social status of these people enabled them to integrate their lifestyle with culture, forming a Ming-Qing ambience that combines opulence, literature and art, and a simple taste. This special lifestyle, unique in Chinese history, reached its most sophisticated state in the Ming and Qing dynasties. It was the benchmark of the cultured elite, of those families who had earned the reputation of houses of scholarly excellence by carrying on the tradition through poetry and rituals. Such a mode of existence, so peculiar to the feudal society of Imperial China, continued for many years after the end of the Ming and Qing dynasties. It was precisely those who played the major roles in this mode of existence who, in order to push the quality of their lifestyle to perfection, came up with a historic stroke of genius in the building of classical gardens. These gardens are like antiques, enlarged and placed on Suzhou's shelves of historical relics.
Despite the high walls and closed doors, life within the garden is inseparably linked with the land and people of Suzhou. If Suzhou is the root of the lotus, the garden is its flower. Both root and flower are nurtured by the gentle and misty waters of Suzhou. These ornate pavilions and terraces were designed for Suzhou's classical gardens. This little corner of simple but graceful leisure is part of a commoner's residence. It is hard to tell which inspired which.
Suzhou's 4 great Ming Dynasty painters used their brushes to recreate the mountains and waters of the lower Yangtze Valley. At Tao Hua Wu, one finds the gorgeous genre paintings of Suzhou's folk artists. It is hard to say who nourished whom.
Kunqu opera was once the favorite of theatergoers. The sound of Pingtan ballad singing echoes down the lanes and alleys. It is hard to say which form of performing arts is more representative of Suzhou.
In those days, antiques and curios were not the monopoly of the garden owners. Everywhere in this ancient city, one could find cultural stores of every taste and style. A Ming Dynasty Suzhou folk song goes like this. On the outside a storefront, on the inside a library. Tea sets, flower vases, and mini couches. Incense boxes and burners displayed on bamboo tables. A singular scroll of a half-counterfeit Dong Chi Chang.
It didn't seem to matter even if this scroll of Dong Qi Chang calligraphy was actually fake. Fiction writer Feng Menglong collected hundreds of stories from the oral tradition. Remarkable as these stories may be, once heard, they tend to be forgotten. One still needs the brushwork of famous artists to add elegance to the decor of the house. The calligraphy may be fake, but Suzhou's elegance is real. For Suzhou is a city of elegance.
Elegance has always been the lifeblood of Suzhou. This city of mist and waters does not just depend for its sustenance on live crab and fresh shrimp, or tender lotus roots and crispy water chestnuts. If it were just for its rich and delicious produce, Marco Polo would not have said, Suzhou is the most beautiful city in the world.
As the embodiment of a unique historical culture, the Suzhou classical gardens have an irreplaceable personality. Some people from developed countries said, "We can copy your gardens and make exact duplicates, but there's one thing we cannot copy, the ancient trees." Indeed, anything severed from its concrete setting is just like the melon broken off from the vine. Environment creates people, environment also creates things. Put differently, sometimes half of the magic power of certain things comes from their environment. Especially cultural environment, in its basic sense, cannot be duplicated. The Suzhou gardens owe their vitality to their unbroken ties with the rich soil of its culture and the life of its people.
The ruins of history have long buried the flowers and lawns of the Wu Palace. Nor can one find the fisherman's light or riverside maple of Tang poetry in Suzhou's misty waters. But the rare flowers in Fang Chengda's poems still blossom with their dazzling gold. The butterflies of Stone Lake still flutter in their annual dance. Flutter on Suzhou's every single spring day.